Well, welcome everybody. I feel kind of like professional sports right now. I'm going to go ahead and do the presentation for tonight's class, but I don't know if anyone's going to be here. I might be doing this in an empty stadium, which is fine, because that means if it is empty today, it just means that you read the announcements that I put out last night, and you see that the live stream is not mandatory any longer. However, watching the video is. Oh, Janine, I'm so glad to have somebody here. How are you? I'm glad that you were able to make it. Thank you. But what I was saying is, I don't expect. Oh, there's 4 of you here. Go ahead and hop in and let me know what's happening. I know I put that announcement in the class yesterday that the live stream is no longer mandatory. It is mandatory to watch the videos themselves, but I prefer to have people on here if you can. But I was reflecting on how complicated schooling has become this semester because of the, you know what, Janine, my blood pressure was super high all last week, and a lot of it had to do with the stress that, it's just not with class only, but hey Brenda, but in general, right? And so when I was getting all those text messages and I kept responding to the same question over and over again, I made sure that I put a announcement in last week exactly when things are due, when the live stream is going to be held. And then yesterday, I did a lot of reflecting on how I wanted to address the live stream because somebody reported to a very upper-ranking person at Miami-Dade College that I had changed the times of the live stream from when they were originally supposed to be posted. And, that wasn't true. And so I noticed that there's a lot of confusion. If I can give you all a suggestion to start off with, please, the WhatsApp chat room, which I'm not a part of any longer, but that chat room, it causes more confusion than it does answers anything. So if you're going to use it, don't use it anymore for information as to about assignments and things of that nature. Oh, Mike Biederman, my college roommate from 1987, 1988. What's happening, Mike? We call him Beetleman. Hey, what's up, Beetleman? So anyhow, as Mike can attest, my stress level was pretty high, and I was a little bit snappy with, Tiny Rachelita. I knew you'd be coming in. Hey, what's happening? But in any case, as far as the live stream, hello, sir. What I realized is that some of you are attending classes live, and in attending classes live, it is very possible, because you won't have access to the library because the library is closed. You won't have access to a computer. And I was sitting there thinking, hey, Chris, what's happening? I know, right? It's okay. I can handle that. Good seeing you, Chris. Tiny Rechalita. Hey, I'm kicking it. I'm getting there. So since I know that your access to resources are really limited on campus, I said I can't put you all in a position where you have to be on my live stream and you're trying to get into a class, right? So I just made the decision. Hey, George. I just made the decision that this isn't mandatory to go for the live stream, but I prefer it because of the fact that we can have questions and a little bit of dialogue and that kind of in that vein. However, Johanna, what's happening? Hi, but I can't make it mandatory and cause you more distress. Hello, Professor. How do we join the WhatsApp chat? Brianna, actually, I don't know. I had to leave it. I didn't want to, but I did leave it because they said there are liability issues, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. If somebody in here has access to the chat, wait until the end of the class and then go ahead and share how she can get into the WhatsApp. People, listen, there's no one that knows this class better than the professor himself, right? So when you get into the WhatsApp and you're confused and someone else is confused, this is why, by the way, and Mike knows this for a fact, I never studied with other people, because when you study, and this is good for you because you still have a multiple choice world that you have to navigate at Miami-Dade College. The reason I never studied with anybody else, because when you're studying with someone else, you're studying with someone who knows as little or less than what you know, right? So when you start talking to other people, you might understand a concept in a particular way, and then somebody else talks about the concept or what's in the book in a different way. Now all of a sudden you're thinking for them from their perspective instead of your own. And what I've always said is, man, you trust yourself. Have a process. Mike knows in my senior year, although we didn't have many multiple choice exams. Hey, Richard, I'm doing it, man. My blood pressure was so high last week that I just had to chill. I couldn't keep answering all those text messages because they're the same question over and over again. So if you have, like, I was asked a question today when we do the analysis, the book review, which is next week, right? Do I analyze the textbook? No, you don't. But you can use the textbook to analyze an autobiography. So you select an autobiography and you write a couple pages on an analysis using stuff from this lecture tonight, from the textbook that you have, and you use that to frame your response. I strongly suggest, once again, go back and watch the video, How to Write a Great Paper. All right? Then watch the video. It's just like 3 or 4 pages, or 3 or 4 minutes, but it's off the chain. It is so powerful in what it's going to do for you, not just in this class, but in every class that you take. Right? Then I want you to go back and look at the Who Am I video. It's just a short one. It's 2 or 3 minutes, and I'm actually going to cover some of that tonight. But get to know that video, because that is the cornerstone to everything that has to do with social environment. Hold on, let me read what Brenda's writing. Yeah, exactly. What she says is that basically people start making stuff up. They confuse due dates. And what I was saying is the reason I don't study with other people, I never did, was because I don't want to think from another person's perspective. I have a way of learning. Hey, George. No, I'm not talking about the assignment right now, George. I'm not going to talk about it right now. I'll talk about it later. No, I can't get a DU hat, Mike. You know darn well everything I wear has got to be Buckeyes. You know what I'm saying? Where's my emblem? Ohio State all day. QEP1 is not for this class, Brianna. QEP is for a whole entire... Wait, it is for this class. Hold on a second. You know what? You're absolutely right. Let me go take a look. Oh, yeah, you're right. It's QEP1. So, just for a second, this is the book, all right? That was another class I was talking about. This is the book, Lethal Violence and Human Behavior, and it's written by yours truly, Sean Schwaner. This is the textbook that you need to really frame that paper. There are a couple chapters in here on guns, on firearms, the use of firearms, debates on firearms. That is an excellent jump-in source for you to frame your paper, all right, for you to frame that QEP1. Now, technically, and I can't really, well, I guess I'm going to talk about it now. Never mind, George, I'll talk about the assignment. All right, technically, I'm not supposed to discuss the assignment because it is part of what is called QEP, the Quality Enhancement Plan. And the Quality Enhancement Plan, QEP, is designed to make persons into better writers. That one, no, the book analysis is you get an autobiography and you review the autobiography using the textbook here. All right. So QEP1, what you're doing is you're talking about your position on gun control, your position on firearms, or whatever it is. Look. Okay. I'm not really a huge proponent of the idea of you using opinions. Okay, I'm not interested in your opinion, really. I'm interested in how do you frame a perspective. In other words, how do you come up with a theory, all right, and use that theory to explain and frame and make sense of the data. So what you're doing, and it's in that How to Write a Great Paper. In your introduction, you're going to write a conceptual introduction, right? You're going to say something like this. You always start your paper, every paper you ever write. No, that was my fault, George. No, this is human behavior. This is human behavior. Someone had just called me just before class started from the social environment class. So let me just reframe. This is the human behavior class. It's all the same. I mean, tonight's class for all classes is going to be relatively the same because I'm going to be covering theory pretty much in depth. So let me go ahead and just talk about that here in a couple seconds. But with the QEP paper, you want to have that introduction. And you always start, here's your first 3 words, always. Brenda, you already know this. The first 3 words should be the name of an author that is germane to your argument. So, for example, if we're going to talk about gun control, we might say Kleck. Then you put down what year, okay? 1987, in parentheses. And then you put down the word argued. Kleck argued. And then you say, basically in 7 or 8 words, what did he argue? Kleck argued that, what did he argue? He argued that, let me reframe that. Let me do it with a different one. Merton, 1937, argued. that social decay has a direct impact on levels of crime. Boom. Okay. The next sentence then therefore has to be something about social decay. During periods in great social change, there will be an expected increase in crime because the norms break down and are violated. Boom, end of sentence. See how easy that is? All right, next sentence. When anomie occurs, groups of people will adapt in various ways, one of which is called innovation. Period. Innovators tend to turn to crime as a way to create stability in their life I'm just trying to imagine I'm writing it, in an adaptation to social breakdown and social disorganization. Then the next sentence, this is your fifth sentence. If you notice, there's 4 sentences, roughly 15 words long. Now the next one is the most important one. Okay, the next sentence is this, and I'm looking for this, and it's in the video, so you can go backtrack and take a look at it. This is exactly how I want it stated. This paper is, comma, therefore, comma, designed to what? All right, so I'll even write it down here. This, come on, in the chat. This is exactly the 5th sentence. This is the killer right here. This is the one that makes the paper worthwhile. This paper is, comma, therefore, comma, designed to do what? To analyze the relationship between, now right here you've got to think in terms of cause and effect, right? Independent variable, dependent variable. The relationship between social decay and violent crime use with a firearm, right? Between social decay, that's my independent variable, right? Social decay and rates of violent crime. Rates of, we'll just say lethal violence, all right? The rate of lethal violence is the dependent variable. So just think of it like this. I know this is not a methodology class, but what you want to think of, this paper is therefore designed to analyze the relationship between an independent variable, a cause, and an outcome variable, dependent variable, an effect. So, for example, my arm hurts, therefore you shoot me, right? Doesn't make sense, does it? I can say the independent variable is gunshot to the arm. The dependent variable is pain, right? I can't have pain before a gunshot. It doesn't make any sense, right? Now, I can have pain, but it's not to analyze the gunshot. So in this case, if you want to talk about a gunshot can lead to pain, this paper is therefore designed to analyze the relationship between gunshots and pain. Boom, done. Independent variable, dependent variable, right? So that paragraph, that sentence right there is the kicker. And here's the reason why that sentence is so important. The reason that sentence is so important is because it forces you to align your ideas. It forces you, by definition, to align, and it makes you focused and organized in your presentation. If you start to write a paper that doesn't have to do with social decay and lethal violence, if all of a sudden you're talking about burglary, that's not focused, right? If all of a sudden you're talking about social control theory, or you're talking about, I don't know, capitalism and inequality, that's not social decay. You want to stay focused in on social decay. The other ideas are great. Same for another paper. Same for your exam. Same for a final or whatever. But keep yourself focused. Look, you're in Miami, and the Miami Heat are just playing some mad ball, right? Didn't they go to the NBA championship last night by knocking off the filthy, ugly, stinking Celtics, a team that I can never stand because I've always been a 76er fan my whole life? Well, let's say, for example, I live in Pinecrest, okay? And I want to go to the game if they're allowing people in. But let's say I want to go to the game, right? But I don't know where I am because I'm in Miami. So I ask you, how do I get to AAA Arena? And you say, well, you live in Pinecrest. Why don't you just travel straight up US 1, okay? And when you get to Coconut Grove, veer right, get on, what is it called, Brickell Avenue. Take Brickell Avenue, go across the bridge, make a right on Biscayne Boulevard, and travel for a mile, and it'll be on your right. You can do that, or you can take me and say get on I-95 and get off on the Biscayne Boulevard get on Biscayne Boulevard, exit, follow it to, follow it and make a left when you get to the Omni and go up to American Airlines Arena. You can also turn around and say, well, maybe you want a scenic view, and you can take me in a different direction. But here's the point. The point is that when you tell me the directions how to get to my house to American Airlines Arena, that's exactly how you write. When you write the introduction, actually write the word introduction in your paper, right? And then the next section is going to be background. Just like you tell me to travel up US 1, that's a street sign, that's a sign. You need to give me the sign so I know where you're going. Otherwise you get lost. So the next section is going to be introduction, background. Then you put down the background. If you're talking about lethal violence as is associated with firearms, or you're talking about the Second Amendment and the debates, the historical debates around the Second Amendment, that's all fine. Hey, Jose, good to see you. Good to see you. Right? It doesn't matter to me, but you want to stay focused on that topic, right? Don't start taking me down one street. Hey, Gabby, what's happening? Don't start taking me down one street, then take all the street signs down and make me get lost. I'm not trying to end up some crazy place. You know what I mean? So give me the street signs. The next one is going to be, here's the theory I'm using, right? And the theories are all in this book, so you don't have to worry about that. Here's the theory that I'm going to use. And I'm going to talk about some of the theories tonight anyhow. Then after the theory, the next section is going to be the data. How are you going to prove it? I don't want your opinion. I want some kind of proof. So here's what you're doing. That first sentence basically frames what's coming. It's going to tell me, it's going to lead me to the data. Your job is to take that first paragraph to frame it. Here's what we're talking about. Social decay and lethal violence. Bam. Next paragraph is the background of that. I am feeling much better. My blood pressure is coming down. I started drinking more water, vegetables, stuff like that, and it came down. I had to attack that stress. Next section, theory, data. Then here's where you make sense of it, doing the analysis. In the analysis, all you're doing is saying, based upon the data, the findings suggest that social decay is related to lethal violence, particularly with a firearm, right? And then you draw a conclusion and you write it. So you write introduction, background, theory, data, analysis, and conclusion. And guess what? When you guys look at Rate My Professor and you see, oh, he's so easy, all this stuff, man, come on, it's not easy. You follow these instructions. If I give you cheesecake, because you want to eat cheesecake, right? And I tell you how to make the cheesecake, right? But you decide you don't want to put the cream cheese in it. Well, you don't have cheesecake, you know what I'm saying? So if I give you the recipe and you put cream cheese in it, and you put the chocolate in, and now you got a chocolate cheesecake, don't tell me how easy I am. All I'm doing is giving you the ingredients to get an A. And if you follow that, introduction, background, theory, data, analysis, conclusion, that is how you write a paper, right? And you got the rules in the video. But the reason I'm easy is because I tell you what I want. And all you got to do is practice. And when you start practicing, what's going to happen is at the end, you're going to be writing masterful papers. And it's as simple as that. So therefore, I appear easy, but I'm not easy at all. What's easier about me than it used to be is I used to give you, a paper every week. In-class quizzes, written exams, take-home exams. In a 16-week period, you were definitely going to get at least 4 or 5 assignments. Mike, if Mike is still here, Mike Biederman, he will tell you that, for example, in 2 separate semesters, we took a religion class with Walter Eisenbeis. We had to write 6 papers. Each one of the papers was 10 pages long, right? My introduction to sociology class when I first took it. We had weekly assignments where we had 4 questions we had to answer. And each answer had to be a page long, so that's 4 pages per week. Then we had 4 10-page papers for the semester and a 25-page term paper. And that was just in one. And so I was brought in with this Denison mentality that you write. But I made a discovery, all right? I made a discovery. One, it burned me out. I'm sleeping with papers. I lay in my bed. Here's the papers laying next to me. I'm like, okay, let me read a stack. Now I go to the bathroom, come back and read another stack. I'd ride the bus to work because I didn't have a car. I don't have a car. I do have a car, but I'm going to sell it. I don't like having cars. But in any case, I'd read on the bus. I'd be grading papers on the bus. It ended up I was reading 16,000 papers a semester. And I was like, man, that's too much. But what I discovered was this. See, it's all theory. It's all theory. There's a concept in economics called the law of diminishing marginal returns. I had one student in my first semester. Her name is, she'd be so mad at me. Vanessa. Vanessa Mott. So Vanessa took this class. She took 4 of them with me. She wrote 54 original papers for me that semester. And she did it, and it was masterful. It was fantastic. But she was exhausted. And I realized that at the end of the semester, I had actually diminished what she was learning by overworking her. I always believed that you should just work people to the point of pain, make a few jokes here and there, and then I learned something, and that is that I was actually retracting is that even a word? Diminishing the amount of stuff that you're learning. So I reduced it to 6 or 7 assignments a semester instead of 16. And what I found is that people retain it much better. They enjoy it a lot more. And based upon that, there was no need for me to give an inordinate amount of assignments. So I'm not easy, but I give you what I want. Here's what I want. Do this. And it's done. Right? So thinking of that, let's just kind of segue into, oh my gosh, I've started the process of grading. Well, I've started the process of reading. The assignments are all over the place, which is okay. That's fine. It's not your fault, right? We are under a most unique situation. Some of you are in live classes, some of you live stream, some are virtual, some are remote, and it's really hard to juggle all that. I get that, okay? Remember, read the announcements, read the syllabus. Everything you need to know is in there. But I love if death had a face, right? On the screen in the chat, put down, write for me, if you found that assignment to be a little bit weird but interesting, right? If death had a face, what would it look like, right? If murder had a face, what would it look like? If murder victim had a face, what would it look like? Oh man, and what I hate about the remote learning, I kept the assignment because it forces you to think differently, right? It forces you to think about something in a different way. As a matter of fact, Mike, going back to Walter Eisenweiss, you know, one of the topics that we discussed in that religion class was this idea of the numinous experience, a near-death experience. Yes, it did, Richie, absolutely. Oh, good, Jose. Now you made my day, right? And one of the things about death is that in American culture, see, prior to the Industrial Revolution, right, the average expected age was 40. So people basically live 40 years. I'd have been gone 14 years ago, baby. Mike, you wouldn't be on here messing with me either. So as it turns out, you know, now that we live on average of 77, it changes the way in which we reconceptualize work, life, love, marriage, you know, employment, entertainment, all these things, right? Everything gets redefined. Well, one of the things that got redefined was the value of children. Because if you go back pre-industrial revolution, children were regarded as these innocent young people who we had to raise and who we had to teach good values to. That's not what children were regarded as. Children were regarded as economic assets because if they lived, because most kids died before the age of 5 because we didn't have medicine. We didn't have the technology to keep them alive and, you know, fight off disease and pestilence and stuff like that. So on average, most kids died at 5. That's why you had larger families back in the agricultural period, is because we didn't know who was going to survive, but we had to have children to maintain the economic system for a family, right? So kids weren't defined as innocent back in those days. Death was a part of everyday life. So therefore, what happened is that the parents had to socialize their kids to understand that life is a fleeting moment. And that's why religion was so strong, because the reason religion was so strong prior to the Industrial Revolution and the secularization. See, this is cultural stuff, baby. You're learning some stuff tonight, right? So here's what happened. So with religion being the foundation of all of our explanations of the supernatural, death and, you know, life, and, you know, why do good people get hurt, you know, all those kind of issues, right? So kids back then weren't defined as these precious, innocent people. They were defined as economic categories, and they were treated as economic categories. My God, you know, I mean, they drank. I mean, the temperance movement that started in 1803 with Benjamin Rush, he wrote about the ills of alcohol and alcoholism back in 1803, and it gave rise to the temperance movement, the temperance movement was designed and engineered and run by the wives of a lot of senators in Washington, D.C. And the ones who came from Philadelphia, the ones who came down from New York and Boston, they had all these immigrants young kids who were living in the streets, and they were living in squalor. If you watch the movie Gangs in New York it's an actual depiction of the five corners in New York City back in the 1800s. So you had Boss Tweed and all these guys. You had the Dead Rats. You had the Plug Uglies. You had all these street gangs, and a lot of them were kids. And the kids fought just like the grown men, because it wasn't so much women at that time in the gangs, but it was the boys that were out there. And by the way, most of the immigrants that came in, the Irish immigrants that came in that period, were men. A lot of the women stayed back in Ireland and came over gradually, so you had what was called the bachelor subculture. If you're noticing, what I'm really talking about is the structure of society at that time. The economic institutions is what was shaping this, right? The political institutions were shaping this outcome. The religious institution was shaping this outcome. The education institution, which did not exist at that time, not the way we understand it now, not mass education, that came with industrialization. Those institutions shaped the way in which kids lived and the way in which they were defined. It's as simple as that. So death was regarded for young kids as something that was very much a part of life, right? Now, when we take a look at death is something that is completely sanitized. Most families probably, I don't know what the percentage is, okay, but most families, they don't talk about death with their kids because on average it's so far in the distance. And if it's far in the distance, then we don't need to bother them with this thing, right, with this thing called death. And therefore, death takes on a different cultural norm now than it did back in that period of time. So, when death has a face, oh my gosh, yeah, Jose, I might have to give the option for you all to watch that as part of this class. There's another movie I watched, because you do have a movie analysis coming up in a couple weeks. Jose, I say George. Dang, I even got my glasses on and I can't see it. All right, Jose, here's the thing, right? Remind me, and you can text me on this one, okay? Because I know I've been kind of an ass with the texting thing, but man, you almost put me in a grave. Speaking of death, I wasn't going there. But what you can do is just remind me that I'm going to give the option to watch, you can either watch Gangs in New York or Freedom Riders. All right, I'm going to give you guys those options because Freedom Riders, WRITERS, with Hilary Swank is one of my favorites. But Leonardo DiCaprio and Gangs in New York is fantastic for this particular class. So I'm going to go ahead. Brenda, you can remind me too. So I'm going to go ahead and make that suitable for your movie analysis. I may even put a few more on there. Okay, yeah, it's fantastic, Gabby. It's fantastic. Scam likely. It's my cousin. All right. He calls me all day. Scam likely. I'll tell you what. I mean, sometimes I want to karate chop my my phone. Yeah, man. Then I'll come up with some more. So, in any case, back to what we're talking about. One of the very interesting parts of our life is the fact that we don't really. It's kind of like, does a fish see water? Right? It's a great question. It's a philosophical question. When you're surrounded by water, do you really see it? I mean, the air is a little bit different, but, I don't recognize the air, even though without it, I'm gone, right? So air is vital. I don't see it. And it's the same with culture. We don't necessarily see culture, but we have to uncover culture. And the reason why I do this, if death had a face assignment, is because, oh my God, in a live class, here's what we would do if we were in a live class. First thing we would do is I'd break you into groups of 4 or 5, and you would take the paper and you'd pass it to everybody. So everybody would read one another's paper. And then on the back of it, what I'd have you do is I'd have you say, what assumptions does this paper make about death? What assumptions does this paper make about murder? What assumptions does this paper make about murder victim? And it's amazing how, because I think last week 2 weeks ago, we talked about common sense. Where does common sense come from? Common sense is constructed by the culture in which we live. Now, the reason why common sense varies is because our introduction into the culture is through the process of socialization. We get socialized into the culture, and typically that's by whom? By our parents, right? So our parents will socialize us into our understanding of the world. They are also socialized by media, by peers, by experiences, all those type of things at the same time, right? So the way we see the world is through a cultural lens. And How do I know that? It's because when I read these papers, oh my God, and then I read them and I see the same assumptions every semester. I've been doing it for about 5 years. I was just sitting back on the bus. I said, "Ooh, this would be interesting," so I did it, and it was fascinating. And so people will start to list their assumptions, and then what I have them do is they take a look at the assumptions of each other, and I have them come up with 1 or 2 assumptions about death, about murder victim. So they come up with all these assumptions, and I have them come up with 1 master assumption about each category. Then, once we do that, this is when people are tripping now. They're like, "What are we doing, man?" And then I have them say, "Okay, now imagine for a second that you are going to make a movie, and that movie was based upon the assumptions from these papers. Give me the title of a movie." So they sit there and they're like, "Oh man, this is kind of weird. Let me think about this." And they come up with a title, right? And then my favorite part, I love this part. And I can't do it in this assignment remote, but I'm telling you the reason why. The next thing I have them do is, you know how you go to the movie theater back when we used to have movie theaters and they were open. You go by and it has a little poster outside the theater and it says, I don't know, Shawshank Redemption, I know that's old, or it says, whatever, Freedom Riders, and then you have Hilary Swank and you have a picture there. I have them come up with, yeah, it's fantastic. So I have them come up with the title of the movie. Then as a group, you got to draw it, right? Then you got to draw the movie. Oh my God, and people are like, "Oh, this is horrible." But it always ends up, someone in that group, there's always one person in the group who is just fantastic artists. So what they do is they tell one another, "Oh, hey Jason, what's up, bro? How are you, man?" Oh, by the way, everybody, just a side note, I'm doing an investment seminar tonight at 7:30. If any of you want to join, it's in the announcement board, so you have the Zoom link that you can get in there. And that is open to the public. That's open to your parents, your friends, your neighbors, the dog down the street. I don't care, because I have a mission that I want everybody to thrive and succeed in time. And it has to start with your financial house. And tonight we're starting a 6-part series, 20 minutes. It's all on 20 minutes on Zoom to kick off with my partner Annette Perez. We're going to kick off this series of seminars to help get your house in order, man. Because it's always a great time to invest. Always a good. Oh, what's up, Willie? What's up, Willie? Good to see you. You better be there tonight for that investment seminar. I know you'll be there. So anyhow, back to it. So what we see is that culture shapes us. Now they get up there and they start drawing these pictures. I won't draw any because I'm horrible. But this one person will always come up. Almost every single semester, there's going to be a picture of the Grim Reaper. Always, right? And they're not thinking about it. Then they come up with some character in one of your an anime or something from like a Netflix series or some type. And don't you ever call me Caputo. Any of you say that I look like Caputo, you got an F. Or what's that dude's name? Caputo. Who's the other one they say I look like? The mayor of Whoville? Oh, right here, buddy. You call me the mayor of Whoville, we're going to have to dance. That's all I got to say. I don't like that. I'll take Andy Garcia, but Caputo? No. Jack? No, I'm not down with that. But they'll come up with these drawings based upon characterizations, right? And if they do come up with something, and that, because what I say is draw a picture about violence. If they come up with a weapon, they almost always come up with a knife that has blood dripping off of it, or they have a firearm, right? Okay. And then there's usually someone will draw a picture with a tombstone, or someone will, draw some kind of a face or whatever. But almost inevitably, the victim, when there is a victim that they draw, is a female, right? And it's almost always a female. And one of the things that comes out is that violence is an act of power, and that those who are most vulnerable in society are the ones who get killed. You see, and our image of violence then is almost inevitably based upon interpersonal forms of violence. You hurt me, I hurt you. You hurt me, I hurt you. They hurt me, I hurt them. Interpersonal, right? Between one another. So our imagery is that violence is interpersonal and physical. Okay? And the victim is female. Now, what we know statistically is that how is it that in a society where the suicide rate is predominantly men, it's not, women do, I mean, obviously there's suicide by women, but I think it's like 78% of suicides are male. And if you take a look at homicide victimization, 88% of the people who die from homicide are men. 92% of the perpetrators are men, right? So how do we come up with this image that a female stranger is the one who gets murdered in our common consciousness? The question is, where does that come from? How can that be? If the most common form of lethal violence, homicide that is, comes at the hands of males, why aren't the males the ones who are being victims in these pictures, right? And you can't see it because you haven't seen the pictures before. And all you have to work with is your own assignment. I'm just telling you in general what has happened in the past, all right? And then, and I love this part, this part, boom, because every single time the offender is drawn, they're crazy, they're cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, right? Their eyes are all bloodshot. They're bulging out. They got drool running down their face. You know, they look like that, right? Hair's all whacked out if they have hair at all, and you know they look demented, right? And so a lot of the times the picture is the mind of the whoever, the mind of Caputo. But that's really important. That's really important because what we're saying in these assignments is that when we think of violence, and we think of lethal violence in particular, we have a very cultural image of what that is. And that cultural image is essentially that crazy people kill, right? There's a show called The Mind of a Murderer. Why are we so interested in the mind? Because when we think of violence in a psychological way, and that doesn't mean psychology doesn't explain it, because it does. Oh, good. Thank you, Brenda. I forgot. When we think it's of the mind, right, that means it has to be some kind of personal failure, some kind of craziness. But if we start to focus our definition of violence on those who are quote-unquote crazy, narcissistic, bipolar, and these are the words that come out, right, during your papers, right, what we're then saying is that we're limiting our analysis of lethal violence. Because if it is true that institutions shape the way in which people behave, then we need to be really understanding what is it about our institutions that make men so angry. Another thing that doesn't come out when we talk about lethal violence. When we talk about homicide, did you know that over 50% of homicides, both the offender and the perpetrator, were under the influence of alcohol? Did you know that? They're legally intoxicated. So why then, when we're talking about lethal violence and people who commit suicide, they're almost always under the influence of a drug or alcohol? Because it is really hard to kill, I think it's time, I think I'll kill myself, and you put the gun up here, and you're like, never mind, I can't quite do it. But if you have alcohol in your system, right, it is a social disinhibitor. So it is possible that a person is more likely to pull the trigger when in fact they when they're under the influence of alcohol. And then we take a look at homicide. What does it mean that 50% or more actually have alcohol in their system? What that means is that those people probably knew each other. So when we think of homicide, we tend to think of strangers who get killed and get whacked by somebody else, when the fact of the matter is, the person who's most likely to kill you is somebody that you know. And sorry, women, I don't mean to be this way. This is just a statistical fact. When we eliminate from our analysis unknown, right? We don't know the offender-victim relationship. When we take that away, the number one homicide, right, is friends killing friends. Within the family, it is husbands killing wives, right? That's the number two category. When we know what the victim-offender relationship is, one is based upon other argument, friend on friend. Two, domestic violence, right? So what we're taking a look at is what is the nature of this anger that is in men? What is it about the masculine script in terms of culture that allows these persons to become more explosive? Does it have anything to do with the cultural ethos that boys don't cry? Because this is what I discovered, because I'm not afraid of who I am. There's a story in Dear Mama in chapter, I don't know what chapter it is, and then there's one in my book, A Mother Cries, which I don't use it in this class I used to, But the publisher's charging $60. I'm like, $60, man, that's too much. And then this book was expensive enough, so I couldn't do two of them. I don't like making that expense. But what I noticed is that even when I was 11 years old, I was walking from my home to Mama Green's house, and I had to go down our street. And when I went down Utah Street, there was a factory, the blue factory on the left side, and I had to turn right and walk on these railroad tracks underneath the railroad bridge to get to Mama Green's house. It wasn't far, it was about a quarter mile or so. But this one day, I'm turning to the right, and all of a sudden I get hit in the head with a rock, with one of those damn railroad rocks. And the railroad rock hits me on the top of the head, and I'm like, what the? And I'm 11 years old, right? And I'm looking around, and here comes another rock. Ping! I'm like, wait, what? Who? And I look up, and there are these three boys up on this bridge, 3 or 4 of them, I can't remember. And they're calling me names and all this kind of stuff. And then they said the words that you have to fight. You don't have a choice. Because in my neighborhood, because I grew up in the inner city, in my neighborhood, you have to fight if somebody says something badly about your mother. And they started calling my mom the B word, this and that and the other thing. They didn't even know her. And so I'm sitting here saying, oh, is that right? And you're going to call my mom names? You're going to call my mother names? And my mom and I didn't even get along most of the time because she was always beating me. So I said, oh, no, you're not getting away with that. So I point up on her and I said, you're dead. You're dead. You're dead. I'll be back. You're dead. So I go to Mama Green's house, and think this is me. I'm a professor now, right? So I go to Mama Green's house, and Mama Green had an arsenal of weapons. She had her gun. Her gun's name was Black Beauty. She had a switchblade that she named Blady May. I don't remember if Mike met her. I know I took him to Toledo. I can't remember if he met Mama Green or not. I think he did. But in any case, she had all these weapons. She had a shotgun. Like I had a shotgun in the corner of my bedroom that I had. And I had a. It's not mandatory to be here right now, but the video is. In fact, when I put it in your class. Let me see. I'm just having technical difficulties, everybody. Okay, I guess we're back. Okay, we're back. All right. Sorry, I don't know what happened. In any case, yes, I have to be at the live stream when I post, right? Because I'm going to post it in your announcements. So in any case, we take a look at it. There's a cultural prescription as to what causes crime, right? Now, I also believe that if we take a look at this, and this is from the Who Am I short video, right? The society, all these economic institutions shape your opportunity structure. Opportunity structure shapes your networks. Your networks shape the small groups that you belong to, right? And then your interaction is shaped by the institutions, right? So you are an ongoing process. You're an ongoing process of becoming a full human. All the phenomenon that you experience and shape your interpretation of behavior. As you learn from your experiences, we start to create categories, right? We start to create categories, and those categories come to define who we dislike. Anyhow, it looks like it's still going. It says so on my monitor. So those institutions shape the context. But the decision to pull the trigger is based upon the way in which we define interpersonal conflict, right? So when we look at lethal violence, it is safer to say that lethal violence is, in fact, a contextual behavior. It happens within a context. What is going on? Hold on a second, y'all. I don't know. Okay, I'll keep going, but I'll have to end up cutting this short, sadly. But in any case, when we act towards one another, we're not acting towards people, we're acting towards categories of people, right? So once we create a category to define somebody else as an enemy, as somebody that we hate, as somebody that's a threat, as somebody who holds the resources to our thriving, money, right? Then, once we have the categories and we can Brenda, that is that's for the social environment class. This is, yes, Dear Mama is for this class, right? The social science class is for social environment, and this is the human behavior class. So for human behavior, we use this. Yes, those are the ones for ISS, that's correct. But If you're not in social environment, don't worry about that right now, okay? Stay with me here in human behavior. But in any case, now, here's where the theory comes into play. If we're going to explain these real patterns of crime, see, the thing that I hate the most is that we utilize our common sense derived from the culture to define for us behavior, right? That define for us homicide, suicide, drug addiction, overdose, all those kind of things. When the fact of the matter is, when we focus on the mind, it takes us away from those structural factors that shape the conditions in which people act. And so as long as we always focus on the mind, we never have to take a look at the fact that economics plays a huge role in who kills and who doesn't kill. We don't have to take a look at that anymore. We have to take a look at education. Those people who kill and get killed on average have a high school degree or less, right? Education is a pattern related to lethal violence, not just the mind. There are other very strong forces that are out there. Now, we can go even further, right? Let's say, for example, that economics is the basis of homicide and suicide, for that matter. It doesn't matter. Emil Durkheim wrote, let me go ahead and write this down for you. Durkheim wrote, he was a functionalist theorist, a functionalist social theory, right? And he came from a functionalist perspective. And what does that mean? A functionalist perspective basically means that society, the institutions from society, right? Those are the forces that shape violence, whether it's suicide or whether it's homicide, right? Because when those structures are working together well, when there's a lot of stability in the institutions, that means you have homogeneity, which means it's a very stable society. So when there's a lot of stability and people are, here's the word, integrated, when they are integrated into the economic system and they're well regulated by the cultural system, then you're going to have less crime. You're going to have less homicide. You're going to have less suicide. Why? Because when you're regulated into the belief systems, right, then you don't point, lethality at yourself. Okay? So therefore, the regulation prevents the suicide. Integration really is the economic integration into what he calls the division of labor. If you are well integrated into the division of labor, right, then the odds of you engaging in violent behavior is very low. Okay? If you're not, the odds, right, it's a rate. Not everybody who's poor kills and not everyone who's wealthy doesn't, right? Because we have these crossovers. But the rate varies according to your social location. So if society is well integrated and it's well regulated, if there's a great deal of what they call in our society, it would be organic solidarity, which is simply we agree on the dominant beliefs within society. We believe that the capitalistic system is the right way to go. And as complex as our world is, we need these pieces, these institutions, to integrate us into a shared form of solidarity. Because the greater the solidarity, the less violence there's going to be. Why? Because you're integrated into society. So, according to Durkheim, what happens is those institutions, when they work together to create stability, it has a direct impact on the expression of violence, whether it's self-directed violence or whether it's externally directed violence. Why? That's because it's functional, right? When all those things work together, they function together. And that function is preventative. Okay? However, if you're not well integrated or regulated, then the odds increase that you will engage in homicide. So, from what I've read, I haven't looked at the numbers yet for this year because they're not out yet with the FBI, but everything that I've read from police departments is indicating that the homicide rate has gone up in the year 2020. And, even with social regulation or social distancing and stay at home and all that kind of stuff, it has gone up. And why is that? The reason why, according to functionalists, that the homicide rate has gone up in the United States is because there's been a breakdown in the normative system. There's been a breakdown in the norms. And that has produced what he calls anomie, right? Durkheim calls anomie. Now Merton, anomie, who came up with anomie theory, also known as, geez, come on, Sean, you don't even need to see. What? Come on, brother. Don't you have a PhD? You can't spell the word theory. Anomie theory, which is also known as structural strain, is that when there's a breakdown in the norms, when there's strain on the institutions, by definition, there's going to be a lot more violent crime. There's going to be more homicide. So it is with that strain in the system that we see an adaptation, an innovation, right? That innovation is going to be violence, right? And it may not reflect, and it probably won't reflect, our cultural icon, our cultural common sense about what violence looks like. And this is why you have these political debates that go way off the rails. This is why we can't come up with solutions to this stuff, is because we start debating from our cultural introduction to common sense, and since our common sense varies by our location within society, we never come up with a policy that works. So some people say Trump is wrong with his Get Tough, his law and order campaign. Well, he is and he isn't. It all depends on your social location, right? So when there's a breakdown in society, you will see more lethal violence, a lot more. But we have to understand, why is it a male domain? And here's the other thing. This is what I love about this exercise, is it does not explain why, when we think of violence, we don't think of symbolic violence, where we call people names, right, where we control them. We don't talk about psychological violation, right? We don't talk about emotional violation, right? The most violence that people receive is violation of a psychological and emotional type from the person that loves them. So your parents are much more likely to give you psychological and emotional violation than they are a physical violation, although there is a cultural ethos of spanking as a way to, spare the rod, spoil the child, however that goes, right? You need the rod to keep the child from getting spoiled. Well, maybe. That's a perspective for sure. But it seems to me that if you have a parent who spanks their kids, hey Nicole, that spanks their kids to teach them a perspective of an adult, then we have a internal contradiction within our society, because we have a juvenile justice system that is based upon and premised upon the idea that kids are innocent, right? So therefore we separate them away from adults so that they can be rehabilitated and released at the age of 18. It's an assumption that they're innocent and they're misled. So if we retrain them, they're going to be fine. But as parents, it's the exact opposite. As parents, we don't look at them as innocent per se. We look at them as our reason for discipline. If we don't discipline them, then they're going to be, they'll be spoiled later. Well, maybe. I don't buy it. Because if you're trying to train someone who is innocent, who is still in development, that they have to act according to an adult perspective, yet and still we beat them for the adult perspective, what happens is we begin to equate love with violence, interpersonal physical violence, and that oftentimes gets passed on. As a matter of fact, if we go one step deeper, you would find that kids who experience childhood trauma, like I did, right? There's 10 categories. I experienced seven of them. One of the categories is physical abuse, emotional, psychological. Then you have alcoholism, drugs, incarcerated parent. What's the other one? Suicide of a parent, poverty, and there's one other one I can't think of. Maybe I listed them all. I had 7 of the 10, right? And one of the most powerful ones was the physical abuse. You can't just turn that off, baby. And yeah, okay. Well, it's not a big deal. You get spanked on the butt one time with a belt. Well, I think it is, because it starts to define culturally what the expectation is. And just think about it this way, and this is where it goes off the tracks. We have a society that culturally prescribes to the idea of engaging in aggravated assault against our children. But if you engage in the exact same behavior as in the workplace, someone makes a mistake in the workplace, you mean to tell me you ran 25 copies instead of 10? Didn't I tell you 10 copies? Give me your belt, man. Give me your belt. Here, let me spank you. Lean over that copier machine. Put your hands there. Take your pants down. I'm spanking you with your own belt. You'd get arrested. But we can do that to our kids. Why? Because it's a cultural prescription, right? But the fact of the matter is, every time you do that, you steal away some of their self-esteem and some of their confidence. And the cumulative effect over time, it has an effect such that if it becomes drastic enough, that kid has a much higher odds of alcoholism, drug addiction, incarceration, death. Death by own hand, death by someone else's hand. But we don't look at it that way because we know for a fact that those categories of childhood trauma have a direct effect on the odds of whether or not you're going to be a victim or a perpetrator. But we don't look at it that way. Why? Because of cultural prescriptions. See? That's why we went through that death had a face process, is because now we can start to understand how culture shapes the way in which we think. Me, I don't think it's necessary. I really don't. I never once raised my voice at my children, nor did they ever get spanked. Never had a hand on them. They ended up pretty darn good. Never once in trouble anywhere. One's in college, getting straight A's and B's. The other one's straight A student. They both run their own companies. One is 15, one's 20. They got their own companies that they run. Seems like they did okay, right? And I came from a very violent background. You know, the odds of me becoming abusive were very high because of what is called the intergenerational transmission of violence. Uh-oh, I better write that one down. Intergenerational transmission of violence. In fact, I was afraid to become a parent because I knew that because I was taught boys don't cry, baby, and you push that stuff down. You push that. Nicole, me too. Thank God for that. Thank God for that. I'm glad you overcame, right? When you read Dear Mama, you'll see what I went through. And I was taught to repress my emotions. But let me tell you something, baby. There are triggers. When you have PTSD, there are things that will trigger you, and you didn't even know you got triggered. Next thing you know, you're doing stuff that is out there. And I knew that if I drank, the triggers become instantaneous. I can't do that, right? And if you back talk me, or you're young and you tell me I'm stupid, right? Then all of a sudden, bam, I'm ready to go. So for me to be a parent, I had to actively relieve myself of those belief systems of what was appropriate parenting and what wasn't. I mean, I had to reconstruct the entire way in which I looked at the world. Part of it is I went to a private school where they taught us a professional language system. But man, let me tell you what, when I got off the bus, I was getting beat up because I was playing a violin, right? I get off a yellow school bus going to a private school. I used to go to a place called Maumee Valley Country Day School. And I'd get off the bus, they'd say, oh, here he comes, Monkey Vomit Country Gay School. Monkey Vomit Country Gay School. You see, I'm relapsing. So they attack me verbally in that domain, and next thing you know, it's having an effect on me. And I go to school, I'm taught this language system, and I come home, and, you know, I'm getting chased by street gangs, hit in the face with ice balls with rocks in them, and, you know, it was it was pretty tough at times, you know. But the thing of it is that I overcame it, right? And I made sure that my daughters didn't have to experience that world that I came from, because it was rough, man. And being taught to repress my emotions, that's what I really had to work on. I don't mean to bring this up, but hey, Lisa, how are you? I don't mean to bring this up, but, you know, my first two wives never had a chance. They never had a chance because I communicated well, but I didn't communicate my feelings very well. And things would just, you know, they would just build up and build up, and all of a sudden, boom, I'm gone. And I distanced myself because, you know, when you get hurt by the person that's supposed to love you the most, right, and all of a sudden you have a really hard time trying to trust people anytime, you know, because, you know, I'm not going to get into blasting on my mom, but, you know, she hospitalized me several times. The first time, it's in Dear Mama, you'll see it. First time, one time I was about 2, 1.5. I was a chubby little dude. So on the cover of the book, you see me. Now I'm not a girl, I know I'm wearing pink, but I wasn't a girl. People say, is that a little girl? No, that was me, okay? I was a little chubby dude, and I walked late. And one time, my mom had come from work. She was in her nurse's dress. And I just tugged on her to give her a hug, and she backhanded me across the kitchen. And I was at Mama Green's house, and I flew, and I landed underneath a exposed iron pipe, and my head hit the wall, just missed the pipe, probably broke my neck. And instead, I was knocked unconscious. I had to go to the hospital. Another time, and I'll talk about it later in the semester, I got beaten very badly. I mean, it was horrific, and I ended up in the hospital. So, and I was actually removed for about three to 6 months. I didn't even get to see my mom because of her meltdown at that point in time, right? So, for me, I was always, even Mama Green always had her gun with her. I mean, I saw her fire a shot over a guy's head at a party. It's not funny, I know. And the guy, well, here's what happened. So, she comes, all right, so she comes out wearing her great big church hat, and it had this big 3-foot peacock feather from the back. And her husband, Daddy Green, said, "Oh, Bert, you're not going to wear that hat again. That hat, I don't like that hat." He was a very soft-spoken man. And she said, "Leo, don't you ever talk about my hat again. I'll wear whatever I want to wear whenever I want to wear. You understand me?" And so this guy in the dinner party goes, oh, it wasn't a dinner party. There were 75 people there. He goes to Daddy Green, "You really going to let your woman talk to you that way?" And the kids are in the kitchen. We're playing. And Bertha looked at him. "You really going to let your woman talk to you that way, Leo? You got to be a man." Bertha said, "Hey, I'll be right back." So it's not funny. I know it's not funny. Well, anyhow. So she goes in her bedroom and comes out with Black Beauty. She fires the shot right over his head. Boom! She meant to miss him. That dude got up. He ran out the front door. She came out and through the screen. And everyone now is running, taking cover. All the kids went into Leo's room, guy. We hid under his bed. There's like 5 kids under the bed. All the adults ran into the living room. Daddy Green just hit the floor and went under the kitchen table. And this guy ran to his car, and it was a stone driveway. Those rocks were flying, man. Pew! And he went driving off. She fired a couple more shots, came back in the house. She said, "All right, everyone, come on back. The party's on." and that's how it ended. So on the one hand, you know, she saved my life. She was loving. But on the other hand, boy, you could not cross her. So at my house with my mom, I was under constant threat. When I went to Mama Green's house, I was protected, but you never knew what was going to take place. You know, you just didn't cross her. Irma Jean always carried a gun. You know, she protected me with it. Gang members were beating me up one day, and she invited one of them into the house and put the gun up to his face and said, "If you hurt him again or anyone else hurts him again, I'm going to shoot you." And so I know it's not funny, right? It's just, you know, I guess when you go through childhood trauma, certain things trigger you in a different way. And I think it's just a way to manage the trauma because, you know, when I really think about it, it's kind of depressing. But on the other hand, you know, I was able to become a professor, award-winning teacher. I've written 6 books, 7, actually 8. Well, 10, depends on how you define it. 2 of them I didn't publish. 2 other ones were the length of a book. And then I had, Nicole, Dear Mama, I have an offer to write the screenplay for Dear Mama to be a movie. It's just, I have so many projects going on that it's hard to do the screenplay. It's all designed. I have it outlined. I know which stories are going to be used in it. I have a production company that has already offered me 15% of the production cost, and they're anticipating a $5 million production cost, so I get paid $750,000. It's just, you know, the day-to-day activity, and I've never written a screenplay. I don't know how to do that. I can write this book. That's not a problem. I can write Dear Mama. I can do all that, but writing a screenplay is a different type of detail, and I just, you know, I haven't had the time yet, but I plan on doing it. But in any case, we take a look at it. Functionalism will explain homicide in that particular way, taking a look at how institutions work together and create anomie, and from anomie rises up the odds of the chances of violent encounter, right? But for me, culturally, we have to take a look at psychological, physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. And institutional abuse is really important. You know, these protests that you're seeing across the nation is because there are police officers who have engaged in excessive force as a part of an institution. So that institutional force is being questioned, and that's really what you're seeing. is you're seeing a response to anomie in real time. And so when we have the institutional forms of violence, where the institutions are actually violating us, we never look at that. The institutions are destroying you. Because why is it our education system hasn't shifted in 120 years? You're being taught in the 21st century, teachers by teachers like myself, who were trained in the 20th century, in a industry that was created in the 19th century. So what you're getting is a structure that is 200 years old and doesn't fit the current economy. So if we really, that's institutional violation of your ability to adapt to the changing economic system. The fact that anybody in America doesn't have health insurance is an institutional violation, right? If you're underpaid for your value, that's an institutional violation. And your whole entire life is based upon institutional violation. That's what it is. You're never going to get paid by someone else what you're worth. That's why it's really important for you to work on your own. By the way, moving over to conflict theory for a second, if we're going to talk about getting paid what you're worth, conflict theory, right, by Karl Marx, right, just basically says that there's a huge discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots, right? We direct our attention away from the haves and what they do, and the institutions are controlled by the haves. The wealthy control the institutions, right? They're the ones that make the decision as to how the education system is going to work. They're the ones that control the economic system. You can't get elected to a public office unless you have money. It's really hard. Otherwise, it's possible, but it's not very likely. And to become president, you really have to go to an Ivy League school, most likely, and have wealth. You know, you have to have substantial wealth. That cuts out, what, 95, 99% of the American population from ever having a chance of being president, just because of institutional violation. We give you the cultural norm that you can become anything, including president, but then the road to becoming president is paved with the gold that comes out of the Ivy League schools. Even Barack Obama went to Harvard, right? Even though he had a very interesting childhood, you know, and background with his family, he still had a nice pathway through Harvard to get to the presidency. Had he gone to, I don't know, University of Wyoming, would he became president? Probably not, right? So those institutional forces constrict us. And Karl Marx says, essentially, that the capitalist class owns and controls the economic system, the mode of production, okay? The wealthy class, the bourgeoisie, they own and control the mode of production. That is how economics are distributed within society. If you own and control information, that is allocated resources, and authoritative resources, and you control allocated resources, that is the economy, and how people get hired and how they get fired, then you control the population. So all the institutions work to favor the wealthy. The reason you get paid less than you're worth is because profits for corporations are built off of your shoulders, right? Because if we pay you more, because human capital is the most expensive part of running a company. If we pay you more than you're worth, then our profits go down and our shareholders complain. So therefore, all the decisions made by especially publicly traded companies are designed for one reason, and that is to create profits, which means you get paid less, right? If we really want to take a look at making change, then you change the economic system. Why is it the poor have access to education that lacks resources, lacks funding, where the teachers are grossly underpaid for what they're valuable? The books are old, right? You have a lower level of tax base, so with the lower level of tax base based upon how much people earn, you have an unequal access into the education system, right? So therefore, when we take a look at crime, we almost always focus our attention on crime on the poor, not the stuff that the wealthy do. If we were really worried about crime in the United States, then we should be focusing on white-collar and corporate crime, the very crimes that cost us billions upon billions of dollars more than all the street crime combined. And then we want to take a look at homicide. Are you serious? How many people are dying because of the decisions that are made by corporations? How many people are dying because a corporation decided that you were laid off and they committed suicide? Well, we don't define suicide as homicide. Why? Because if we did, then we'd have to see what was the root of their displacement, right? Why aren't we taking a greater look at the number of people died at American corporations around the world by working in or in work environments that are like purgatory. Because you don't have the regulations in the sweatshops, you have people dying all the time. But it was 3 years ago in Bangladesh, 5,000 people died in a fire because they couldn't get out of the sweatshop. Who was it? It was an American corporation that ran the sweatshop. Why? So that you can get a T-shirt or you can get a shirt for a reasonable price. And what happens? That price gets jacked up. That shirt that costs 50 cents, you end up paying, what, $50, $60 for it? Well, do the employees at the Bangladesh office, do they get that money? No, they don't get it. It travels up to the top, to the corporate suites, and then out to shareholders, right? There's no reason why an Air Jordan should be $200. The shoe only costs $5, $6 to make, right? So where's all that profit goes? It goes to Nike, and then it goes to paying Michael Jordan to be a billionaire in advertising and revenue dollars, right? But you don't get the satisfaction of making that money off of that shoe, right? You don't get it. It trickles up to the wealthy. So us proletariats, which is what everybody else is, the 99%ers, even those who make 100,000 or more are still proletariats if they do not control their own company, if they do not control their own investments, their own assets, right? There's two types of assets. The assets the wealthy get appreciate in value over time, right? Because you have outside investors investing in their company and they get the revenue. You invest in assets that depreciate in time. Your car, as soon as you buy the car and you drive it off that lot, it's now all of a sudden worth 30 to 40% less than what it was when you bought it. Are you serious? Right? That shirt that you just spent $60 for, that dress for $150, you try to sell it back on eBay after you wore it about 4 or 5 times. It's worth what, $10? Right? You just took a 98% loss on your investment in your own private property. See, according to Marx, what we do is we're all in competition to acquire private property. And in that competition, money flows to those who have the wealth. They control the institution, so your access to that property is limited. Take a look at Miami, right? What was it, in 2016? Out of all the property sold in Miami, only 10% was purchased by people from Miami in the United States. The other 90% were investors from other countries, right? Why? Because your credit score is so jacked up that you can't even get a loan for a house any longer. Why? Because the reason you can't is because the housing bubble in 2008 was controlled by the wealthy. They didn't go to prison for all the malfeasance that they engaged in. Instead, you lost everything. The general public was bankrupt, while the corporations got bailed out with $1 trillion, right? Corporations got $1 trillion so they wouldn't go under to protect shareholders. Meanwhile, the individual had to file bankruptcy, committed suicide. Everything shifted for the individual. So why is that? Because the wealthy make the decisions that favor their social class. So social class inequality, according to Marx and conflict theory, social class inequality is designed to keep the poor down and allow the wealthy to rise up. So where does crime come from? Alienation. Once you create a class of people who feel detached from their job, who feel detached from themselves, who feel detached from nature, are much more likely to engage in violent crime. Why? Because with alienation comes anger. And anger is a pattern behavior. It is not an emotion. It is a pattern of behavior that is structured by inequality. Right? So therefore, when you are disproportionately poor, middle class, working class, what have you, that anger is expressed through alienation. So those who are alienated are much more likely to engage in violence, lethal violence, than those who are not. That's a conflict perspective, right? The haves and the have-nots. We don't focus on their malfeasance. We don't focus on white-collar crime. We focus on street crime. Why do we focus on street crime? Because street crime is disproportionately committed, or at least perceived to be committed, by the poor who are minorities who are urban. End of story. Meanwhile, other persons who engage in the same type of crime get probation or they get community service or something like that. Why? Social class inequality. So the perspective that you use to explain crime, right, is really, and you can use this for guns, right? So next week you have a paper on gun control or whatever the assignment is. You can do the same analysis. You can use either a conflict perspective or a functionalist perspective or use some kind of historical perspective tied to the Constitution But what you want to do is in that first paragraph, you're going to grab the perspective that you want to use and build it. And when you build it, then what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and come up with the background, right? And so if you're doing, for example, gun control and conflict theory, your background is going to be on social inequality. It's going to be on social inequality and firearms. But if you're a functionalist, you're going to talk about how the use of firearms creates stability in society, right? So, I mean, the orientation that you use, theoretical orientation, is going to be really important as to how you express that paper. I'm not going to cover symbolic interactionism tonight because I think you've had about enough. Let me see by a show of hands, or however you want to see it, by expressions, what's tonight worth your time? Was this a worthwhile class this evening? Did you learn anything? All right, Nicole. Let's see who else. Only Nicole got something out of this? Let's see. All right, Lisa, come on. That's cool. All right, everybody. Remember, read the announcements. And 30 minutes from now, at 7:30, just in case you didn't know this, I am doing a financials and investment seminar on Zoom with my best friend, my partner from Primerica, with Annette Perez, and you'll get to meet her as well. But I take this stuff seriously. All right, Richie, I take this stuff seriously. If conflict theory is correct and there's inequality, one of the ways of addressing the inequality is by being financially independent. And what she and I have is a mission to allow people to become financially independent. So please join us tonight at 7:30, which is in 33 minutes. It's on Zoom. So if you want to attend, just go into your announcements, and the number is posted there. I can give you the number, the Zoom number, by the way. I can do it right here. It's 528-413-8043. All right. And tonight I'm going to be talking about why do we invest? How do we build our financial house? It's a 6-part series, 20 minutes each, and, you know, it's important. It really is important. All right, everybody. Thank you for showing up tonight. I hope you have a great week. I'll see you in the live stream in 2 weeks. Although these are not mandatory, I really did appreciate you being here. Beetle, I think you probably checked out. Mike Biederman, I'm sure you checked out by now. Also, Willie, I'm sure you checked out by now. But thank you all. I'll be posting this in the live stream or in the class. Thank you, Nicole. Deeply appreciate it.